Hello, everyone. I am Lana Zach. I am in for Vladimir Duthier, who is on assignment. It is Election Day here in these United States. We are watching all the developments happening in the U.S. and around the world. If it's happening on all these monitors behind me, we're going to bring it to you live. This is CBS News 24/7. The 2024 presidential election is officially underway. Millions of Americans showing up to the polls right now. More than 80 million people have already cast an early ballot in person or by mail. And in the tiny town of Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, that's the first to open the polls. They did so on Election Day. At midnight, 6 registered voters cast their ballots. And guess at the results? A 3-3 tie between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Now, for their part, both candidates have spent the last few days rallying voters in those swing states, and the stakes are high. With Trump and Harris deadlocked in all of those battleground states, Trump went on the offense at his final rally in Michigan yesterday. He hit Harris's performance as vice president.
Kamala has delivered soaring prices and true economic anguish at home, war and chaos abroad, and a nation-destroying invasion on our southern border. We're not going to take that. We're going to end that, immediately.
Meanwhile, VP Harris took a moment to speak directly to voters about what she plans to deliver as a new generation of leadership.
We are ready for a president who knows that the true measure of a leader is not based on who you beat down, but based on who you lift up. As president, I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to the challenges you face.
Now, I want to show you this live pictures as Election Day voters in Alexandria, Virginia, show up to the polls casting their ballots. We have CBS News team coverage. Campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi is following the Trump campaign, and Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is with the Harris campaign. Olivia, I'm going to start with you. Both candidates spent their last day in Pennsylvania, which has 19 electoral votes, a large Latino population. What was Trump's goal there, and did he gain an advantage by rallying into other swing states?
Well, good to be with you, Lana. As you mentioned, Pennsylvania is one of the most crucial battleground states of this entire election. It has the most electoral votes up for grabs. So Trump spent some time there yesterday. We started in Reading, Pennsylvania. Now that is near Philadelphia, somewhat of a suburb near there. And it's actually one of the few places where Trump actually improved his standing from 2016 to 2020, earning more of the voter share in that part of the state. So Trump there rallying supporters in a midday rally, and then heading to Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, where he held a rally in Pittsburgh, downtown Pittsburgh, in the Penguins Arena. And there it was, pretty lively inside. He called it a closing to voters in that crucial battleground state. And there he talked about the economy, immigration, things like he believes he has an edge against Vice President Kamala Harris on. So we heard him there trying to really assure voters and trying to make sure that in the Keystone State his message is being heard, and that he's trying to rally his base and get out those voters, but also speaking to independent voters, issues on the economy, things like talking about his no tax on tips policy, no tax on overtime policy, mentioning those things last night to try to get some of those independent voters, suburban voters, over to his side, saying that he would provide some economic relief to them. So that's kind of the messaging we heard there yesterday from the former president.
And Olivia, you're right there where the former president is expected to cast his ballot. A little bit of difficulty, though, getting that signal out of there. Nancy, let's talk about Harris, because she seemed to refocus her message yesterday to highlight what she plans to deliver. Tell us about her message.
Right. She is really looking forward, a very future-focused pair of speeches at major rallies in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia last night. Didn't mention Trump once by name. The campaign really trying to signal in these closing days, Lana, that they have the momentum. And part of sending that signal is, focusing less on your rival and focusing more on what you want to do when you win, and the fact that you are a candidate of generational change. And so that's what she really emphasized. She talked a lot about unity, basically trying to rise above some of the pettiness that we've seen on the trail in recent days. Lots of name calling from Donald Trump. She's stupid. She's low IQ. J.D. Vance yesterday saying that it's time to take out the trash and that the trash is named Kamala Harris. She really didn't touch any of those comments yesterday, had nothing to say about it. This campaign trying to send a signal to their supporters that this race is winnable if they just get out and vote.
Well, let's talk about some endorsements. Olivia, Trump got a round of last-minute endorsements. Who's backing him? Does the campaign think that this will help propel more voters to the polls?
Yeah, the campaign touting two big endorsements yesterday. One from Megyn Kelly, the former Fox News and NBC News anchor, who came out yesterday and endorsed the former president and actually spoke to the issue of suburban women voters, saying that Trump will actually be a protector of women. That's something we've heard him talk about on the campaign trail in recent days, and his last-minute appeal really to the suburban women, that this argument that he would be a threat to their abortion rights, to women's health issues, that he's actually a protector of them. So that's the goal in that endorsement. But then we also heard about Joe Rogan, the podcaster who Trump sat down with just last week for that very long 3-hour podcast that I had to listen to, actually coming out and endorsing the former president, talking about issues on immigration, economy, and the border. So him coming out and endorsing Trump there. And that's part of this play that the campaign has really been leaning into to try to appeal to young men, those low propensity voters, young men, typically don't come out and vote all the time, but really trying to get them excited. Joe Rogan is one of the most prominent podcasters out there right now. So by getting his endorsement, they hope it's that last-minute push they need to really get those voters to the polls today on Election Day.
That Megyn Kelly endorsement, interesting given their past history. Nancy, Harris has obviously leaned on a barrage of big-name supporters. What was the sentiment at the Philadelphia rally last night?
Well, it was a star-studded event. You had Lady Gaga, you had Oprah Winfrey, lots of musical guests and bold-faced names. As she just tries to get as much attention as possible in these closing days, and looks to show that she's got a big tent, that she is reaching out to not only moderate Republicans by having someone like Liz Cheney on the trail, but that she is also reaching out to progressives by stumping yesterday with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She spent a lot of time yesterday courting Puerto Rican voters very overtly in Pennsylvania, knocking on doors. She went to a Puerto Rican restaurant. She was introduced by Fat Joe, who is also Latino in, I believe it was either Reading or Allentown. He gave an impassioned defense of her policies. So she's trying to show that it's a broad tent, and she's trying to bring as many people as possible into that tent by enticing them with some of these big stars.
All right, Olivia and Nancy, thank you both. Well, polls are open this morning in Georgia, and you may remember that the state flipped blue for President Biden during the 2020 election and was the focus of a major election interference case against Donald Trump and multiple co-conspirators. CBS News correspondent Dave Malkoff joins me from Atlanta. Dave, what are you seeing there at the polls?
Well, just seconds ago, we heard from the Fulton County elections, and they were telling us that today they had 5 what they are calling non-critical bomb threats at different polling locations. 2 of those polling locations had to be evacuated for a short period of time, but all of those polling locations are back open. In fact, all of them all throughout Fulton County, which is the county that has Atlanta, are now open, including this one here in Buckhead. This is the Buckhead Library. We have seen no lines here. A lot of people coming and being able to vote very quickly here. We've also stopped down in Fayette County, which is south of the Atlanta airport, and we were able to see the same kind of thing. A lot of people have voted early in Georgia, and those numbers are in the millions. So now we have a lot of people who have waited until the last minute, and they are voting on Election Day. We talked to one voter today who said that she didn't have a car to vote for the early voting. So she went out and bought a car to be able to vote today. Obviously, she needed the car for work as well. But one of the critical reasons why she got the car at this point was to be able to have a car so she and her family could vote in this critical election in this critical swing state.
That's a wild story, Dave. Before I let you go, though, glad to know that those bomb threats non-critical, but certainly concerning. Do we know anything more about who could have been behind it?
No, Fulton County is investigating those claims right now, but they did have those checked out. They did have to evacuate those 2 locations just for a moment. We're still early on here, so we have hours and hours to go for voting here, and everybody is being very cordial with each other, everybody coming and going and being able to vote very quickly. There are no long lines that we have seen, at least here in the Atlanta metro area.
All right, Dave Malkoff, thank you. Well, we are seeing some reports of alleged intimidation and voter misinformation in North Carolina. The battleground state has been reeling for weeks from both Hurricane Helene and the deluge of false claims that followed, including threats against FEMA officials. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry is live in Raleigh for us. Skylar, officials there basically saying, yes, there have been instances of this kind of thing, but nothing to the scale of what they were seeing post-Helene. Explain what the last few weeks have been like and what you're seeing there today.
That's exactly right, Lana. Good to be with you as always. What we have seen essentially is in that first couple of days, first couple of weeks following Hurricane Helene, there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation that was out there that was saying that the government's response to the hurricane, remember there was those FEMA concerns as well in terms of their response. They're saying that that was actually stifling the Republican response or the Republican vote. And really, government officials, election workers, and everyone has said that that is simply not true. As for these last couple of days in terms of misinformation and disinformation, election officials have said that there hasn't been much of a threat, but they are upping law enforcement postures in and around the state. We know that in each of the election offices throughout the state, they have what they're referring to as additional security screenings to try to keep in line and make sure that if a situation were to arise at a specific election office, that they have measures in place to make sure that the poll workers who are there and the folks who are working inside of those offices are as safe as possible. And that's installing everything from panic buttons to proper evacuation routes. But again, elections officials have said that there has not been any sort of threat that has popped out in terms of their concerns. But they say that this is something that is a bit different from what we saw 4 years ago. They're saying they're doing a little bit more with less in terms of the number of people that they have on hand to do the job, but they feel as if they're prepared for it today.
Glad to see that they've made those preparations, but that they don't need to use them right now. Real quick, Skylar, what are the differences between the candidate strategies there?
Yeah, so the Harris-Walz campaign, they actually feel pretty confident about what we're seeing today and what we've seen in North Carolina. And that is despite the early voting totals, some 4.5 million voters showing up to cast their ballots, a large number of them Republicans, which is an about-face, if you will, from what we saw in 2020. But they also feel as if this is a state that is very much in play, which is interesting. Especially considering that this is a state that has gone to former President Trump the last 2 cycles. It's gone to the Republican presidential candidate since 2012. And also, to that point, the Trump campaign obviously also feels pretty confident about what's happening here in the Tar Heel state. But we should, in a bird's eye view, sort of zoom out and pay attention to the fact that he had 4 rallies here in 3 days, suggesting that this is absolutely a state that he has to win. Remember, this is the only battleground state of the 7 that we identify that he won 4 years ago. And so this is a state that he has to lock in. He told supporters here in Raleigh that he feels as if that can happen if everyone shows up and shows out to the polls. As for Democrats, they say that they are focused on a range of issues. Many of the voters that we spoke with say that reproductive rights, the economy, immigration, those are all issues that they say that they are focused on. This is a largely Democratic polling precinct here in Wake County. That's where Raleigh is. And they say that they're excited to see if history could be made here tonight. We'll see what happens when polls close at 7:30.
All right, Skylar Henry, thank you. Well, be sure to stay with us for all day coverage today. You can also watch Election Night with the CBS News team live from our election headquarters. You see it there in New York. And with our team spread out across the country, join us for real-time results, analysis, and exclusive polling. Coverage starts at 4 p.m. Eastern on CBS News 24/7 and 7 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Well, we're going to show you now some live pictures coming to you from Los Angeles. Voters there lining up around as well as around the United States to cast their ballots in this historic election. We're going to have more coverage straight ahead. Go nowhere. I'm Lana Zach, and this is CBS News 24/7. Striking workers at Boeing voted Monday night to accept the company's latest offer, bringing an end to the nearly 2-month-long strike. Union leaders urged members to accept the proposal, which includes a 38% wage increase over 4 years. It did not, however, include a reinstated pension benefit. That was a sticking point. 33,000 employees can now start going back to work as early as tomorrow. In a statement, Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg acknowledged how difficult the past few months have been, adding in part, "We're all part of the same team." Nearly 2 million voters in New Jersey already cast their ballots during early voting. CBS News New York reporter Christina Fan has more on the enthusiasm around the election in the Garden State. Christina, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Christina Fan in Fort Lee, New Jersey, where voters in the Garden State have come out in record-breaking numbers to participate in early voting for this year's presidential election. That enthusiasm carries on to this morning. We've already seen dozens of people coming in and out of the polling center behind us. Now, few seats are expected to change hands here in the Garden State, but voters will be electing a new U.S. Senator for the first time in 11 years. That seat was vacated by former Senator Bob Menendez, who was convicted on federal bribery charges earlier this year. Democratic Representative Andy Kim is going up against Republican businessman Curtis Bashaw in a race for a seat that Democrats have held for more than 50 years. 1 in 4 registered voters have already cast their ballots so far. Polls in New Jersey will close at 8 p.m. Reporting from Fort Lee, Christina Fan, back to you.
Thanks, Christina. Well, the Keystone State is a focal point for both campaigns on this election day. It has been, really, from the beginning. Here's why. Whoever wins Pennsylvania will have the easiest time reaching those 270 electoral votes needed to win. And CBS News Philadelphia reporter Waukesha Bailey is live at a polling place in Philly. What are you seeing there? And are voters really fired up after those Pennsylvania rallies from both campaigns yesterday?
Yeah, good morning, Lana. You know, voters here in Philadelphia, they've been fired up for some time now, especially after last night's festival. Now, right now, we are at one of the largest mosques here in Philadelphia, and soon we're going to be seeing some of our top leaders come here. They're going to be casting their ballots, one of them being Mayor Sherrell Parker here in Philadelphia. Now, we've been out here all morning, and as you know, our polls opened at 7 o'clock this morning, and so far, these lines have really been nonstop. A lot of people are here because they have a lot of issues. They also know that this day is very historic, and they have had no problem telling us who they're voting for or why they plan on also voting. Lana?
All right, Waukesha Bailey, thank you. Well, on Election Day, or any day, New York City is a place where security is always top of mind. And today, the FBI's NYC division is joining the NYPD and others to protect the millions of New Yorkers headed to the polls. And the Bureau has plenty of resources elsewhere that are also in overdrive today. Samantha Vinograd is at a CBS News she's our CBS News national security contributor, and she joins us now from Bethesda, Maryland. Sam, this kind of announcement doesn't seem to be in response to anything specific. So what are you hearing about the general Election Day threat landscape?
Well, Lana, this announcement by the FBI is both expected and reassuring. Federal officials all across the country are teaming up with their state and local partners to ensure that there's adequate monitoring of threats around the country and adequate resources on standby. Federal officials have set up command posts, again, all through the country, working with their state and local partners to share threat information. and have engaged in a lot of operational planning to put federal resources in the right places in support of their state and local partners. So what I'm hearing is that this is a very complex threat environment. There are a range of terrorism-related, criminal, and foreign nation-state threats affecting the election. But officials at all levels of government feel relatively confident that over the last few years, they've done such in-depth operational planning that they are quite prepared for whatever may come our way, not just today, Lana, but in the weeks ahead when there may be a period of prolonged uncertainty.
That is such a good point, Sam, because we know that we need to prepare ourselves, that we will not have an answer immediately, and that people will be on edge until there is an actual person inaugurated. Let's also talk, though, about what I was hearing from Dave Malkoff in Fulton County, that there were several bomb threats that were called, and none of them, in fact, credible, but credible to the point that some polling places were actually evacuated. Have you heard anything from your sources about those?
Well, what I've heard is that officials have been preparing for this exact type of scenario, a series of both credible or non-criminal, criminal threats like bomb threats, or what we call swatting, where people call in fake incidents to elicit a law enforcement response. That's one of the scenarios that law enforcement officials have been planning for. The goal of these fake threats is really oftentimes to create panic or to draw law enforcement resources to the wrong places. Law enforcement across the country has been training in the first instance to try to figure out whether a threat is credible, to evacuate places quickly, do a sweep, make sure they're secure, and to make sure that if they're being pulled in a lot of different directions because of a variety of threats materializing, that they have plans with neighboring jurisdictions to bring in other law enforcement partners to try to backfill so that there's not a security vacuum. So for better or for worse, Lana, I'm expecting more bomb threats. I'm hopeful that all of them are non-credible. But folks should not be surprised if there's more bomb threats or swatting threats or other kinds of criminal activity, but they should know that their law enforcement personnel in their communities have been training for this exact type of scenario.
Well, it's good to know that there's training. It is important to say these are not pranks, these are criminal acts. So, Sam, what's your message to Americans who may be feeling a high level of anxiety as they're preparing to go out and vote?
Well, my message would be it is certainly a complex threat environment, and that's why not just for weeks or months, but for years, officials across the country have been planning extensively to share threat information and to do scenario planning to make sure the right resources are in the right places. Voters should know that there is no indication that the integrity of our election infrastructure can be altered, and that there are officials all across the country ensuring that they can vote safely. They should know that there is going to be a deluge of additional information operations today and in the days ahead as a variety of bad actors try to generate discontent and sow chaos. So every voter should feel safe going to the polls today, knowing that law enforcement officials in their communities are well equipped to deal with threats. But they also should know that there's a lot of fake information that's going to be circulating to instigate panic and other reactions, and they should not just double check, but triple check the source of information, Lana, to make sure that what they're digesting is accurate. And a very good place to look is at the state Secretary of State social media feeds that can, or local law enforcement officials, to stay up to date, not just on threats, but on what is or is not credible information.
Absolutely. Sam Vinograd, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there is much more ahead as we follow the first votes coming in across the country. And we're also going to take a look back at how we got to this historic election day. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. And as we continue our coverage of this election day, we wanted to actually rewind a little bit, take a look back to how we got to this historic place. And we're going to start on January 6, 2021. That's when Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol trying to block the certification of the 2020 election. After the attack, former President Donald Trump faced a second impeachment and was indicted on criminal charges for allegedly inciting an insurrection. He denies any wrongdoing. President Biden faced several crises overseas in the first months of his presidency. On August 30th, 2021, the U.S. completed its withdrawal from Afghanistan. The operation, you'll recall, was marred with chaos and violence. And while Biden is often blamed for how the situation played out, that withdrawal agreement was actually negotiated between Trump and the Taliban in February 2020. At the same time, the U.S. has been navigating wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East. Now, back on U.S. soil, it was a seismic event on June 24th, 2022. That's when the Supreme Court reversed Roe v. Wade, deciding that the U.S. Constitution does not protect abortion access. By overturning the nearly 50-year-old legal precedent, the justices returned the issue back to the states, and now abortion rights for each of those states are on several ballots today. Now, the presidential race was initially cemented on March 5th, 2024, Super Tuesday. President Biden, former President Trump, they both clinched enough delegate votes to become the nominees for their respective parties. Trump at the time refused to debate any of the challengers during the primary season. That included Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie. Biden, for his part, didn't face any serious challengers. And then on June 27th, Biden and Trump had their first and only presidential debate in Atlanta. This was a turning point for Biden. He blamed a cold and fatigue for poor performance. But in the weeks that followed, the president really faced calls from some of his strongest allies to drop out of the race. And then, about 2 weeks later, on July 13th, the Trump campaign held a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. But that event turned violent when a gunman opened fire at Trump. A bullet grazed his ear. One person was killed and several others were wounded. And this was the first of two potential assassination attempts. Both Democrats and Republicans then called for a tamping down of the rhetoric. Just 1 week later, we saw that social media post that shocked the world. President Biden announcing on July 21st that he was no longer seeking a second term. He endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. Democrats quickly rallied behind Harris and confirmed her nomination. And then on September 10th, Harris and Trump met for their first and only presidential debate. Harris would later go on to accept a second debate offer from CNN, but the former president declined. Since then, the campaigns have been going fast and furious, and all of that brings us to today. After months of campaigning, Election Day is finally here, and now it is time for us to see what America decides. With around 80 million people already voting early, millions more are headed to the polls at this very moment. And to talk more about the presidential election, I want to bring in the politics editor at Bloomberg News, Laura Davidson. Laura, how's this historic moment going to be recorded in American history?
Well, this, has the potential to be a historic election no matter who wins. Of course, if Harris wins, it is the first black woman to be president. And then if Trump wins, it is a rare case where you have a president serving non-sequential terms. But what's more important is what happens after January 20th, where there could be widespread differences in sort of the policies that could be very swift. Trump has pledged to deport millions of immigrants. He's also proposed to impose these very swift tariffs. He's proposed to be very involved in some of these offshore conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, effectively wanting to, end those immediately. Whether that can be done remains to be seen. Harris represents a more of a steady hand. She's proposed change, but more of incremental change, unlike the complete upheaval that Trump has campaigned on.
Well, when we're thinking about history, there have been some elections, especially when we're waiting for results, that really evoke that historic feel. We think about Bush v. Gore and hanging chads. We think about President Obama being the first African-American elected to the presidency. When we're talking about Trump, his record and legal problems would put him in an entirely new category. And we're also thinking about January 6th, of course. So what do the next few days look like, and how might it test the American electorate in a way that is historic and fundamental to our democracy?
So the polls suggest that this race is very close, which means that we could be waiting for days, if not weeks, to get a final result here. Some of these states, Pennsylvania is one key example where the polls show it is basically deadlocked. This could come down to a couple thousand votes either way, which means that we could be waiting for days as these states count these votes, which really presents an opportunity for misinformation, disinformation, and for one side to claim victory prematurely or without evidence, without the data supporting it. And that really has the potential to be a major problem. We saw what happened in 2020 in January 6th of the big lie, the calls here that Trump falsely claiming he won the election spurred his voters into action. There's a lot of concerns from all sides that same thing will happen again. Trump will also fight this throughout the legal system, and he's had a good run of luck in the legal system recently. He has a judicial system that he has helped shape, and that has lots of Democrats worried that potentially he could litigate his way to the presidency.
All right, Laura Davison, thank you. Well, voters are already hitting the polls in the battleground state of Wisconsin this morning. Nearly 1 million people in the state cast their ballots during early voting, and CBS News Minnesota reporter Pauline Lee has more.
The race for the White House also goes through the battleground state of Wisconsin, where voters are expected to turn out in full force here. As we take a look, this is the Hudson Fire Department, one of 3 voting locations here in just the city of Hudson. First voters arrived just before 5:30 this morning, and just in St. Croix County alone, more than 45,000 people are expected to cast their ballots today. Among the key races to watch, hotly contested and expensive U.S. Senate race between Democratic incumbent Tammy Baldwin and Republican challenger Eric Hovde. Latest Marquette Law School poll shows Baldwin leading 51 to 49%, but that's also within the poll's margin of error. That gap has closed significantly since Baldwin's 7-point lead in August. Both candidates have spent hundreds of millions of dollars in an effort to reach the voters. Polls by way close at 8 o'clock today, but don't be expecting the results to be streaming in right away once the polls close here in Wisconsin, as the rules here state that absentee ballots aren't supposed to be counted until today, that is Election Day, which is different from other states. We'll send it back to you.
All right, Pauline Lee, thank you. As a reminder, be sure to stay with us for all-day coverage today. You can watch Election Night with the CBS News team live from our election headquarters here in New York, and with our team spread out across the country. Join us for real-time results, analysis, and exclusive polling. Coverage starts at 4 p.m. Eastern on CBS News 24/7 and 7 p.m. Eastern on CBS. I'm going to bring in now CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore. Grant, there's a lot of pollsters and election people that really look at the forecast on Election Day and read a lot into it. What can you tell us?
Well, look, Lana, I mean, the weather and the weather conditions, whether it's rain, snow, warmth, cold, all of that does play into voter turnout. Obviously, nicer weather, more people are going to be a little bit more inspired to get out and vote. It does play a little bit of a part in what the final results will be. I will say, though, it doesn't look like weather is going to be a huge impact, though, especially for those battleground states. You see a lot of that rain, in fact, a pretty strong cold front moving across the United States with some mountain snow coming into the Rocky Mountains. Let's start in the southeast this morning, where places like Georgia and North Carolina actually have pretty decent weather, unseasonably warm weather at that. Temperatures in the upper 70s to even upper 80s in places like Valdosta. North Carolina has a little rain coming in through the mountains, but most of the state stays dry, but unseasonably warm with temperatures in the mid and upper 70s, if not near 80 degrees. Pennsylvania, big battleground state there. Temperatures in the mid to upper 70s, if not Pittsburgh climbing up to 82 degrees this afternoon. Michigan and Wisconsin, this is going to be the big weather impact. Heavy rain likely. A lot of voters are going to have to navigate those showers. Temperatures going from the 70s to the east, but the 40s to the west. Meanwhile, Nevada and places like Arizona, pretty nice weather. Just a little bit cool to the north, but 70s in Phoenix. Lana, back to you.
Wow, 80s in Pennsylvania. Grant Gilmore, thank you.
That's crazy.
And speaking of Pennsylvania, we're taking you now to Philly. The city's district attorney is giving an update from his office's Election Day task force. Let's listen.
That is the number here for the election task force. It allows us to enjoy the excellent work of all these great assistant district attorneys and an awful lot of DADs. What's a DAD? That is a district attorney detective. These are police officers who work in this office or are detailed to this office, and they are with us every step of the way in the work that we are doing today. Their assistance is crucial. It's very important. And needless to say, we also have the partnership of the Philadelphia Police Department, the FBI, and others in law enforcement who are here to make sure that these elections are free, are fair, and are final. We want witnesses. We want the truth. We don't want nonsense. And I want you to know we do not have reports of anything that looks like voter fraud. We do not have any serious indication of voter fraud We do not expect to have it, but if it's there, we want to know about it. We don't want to hear a bunch of crazy fiction later about how things happen. This is the time. You got an issue, bring it to us, show us the evidence. We are here in an even-handed fashion, but we have seen no evidence of that so far today. We have seen no evidence of that in prior elections. And let me just say, if we start to hear about it at 9 o'clock after the polls are closed, you should be rightly suspicious of what you are hearing. Now, I found myself, to everyone's surprise, getting a lot of attention yesterday over something I said. And I came in this morning only to find that these hardworking members of the Election Protection Task Force had gone out and printed up the T-shirt just so people will understand how serious we are, that we are not going to tolerate interference with a free, fair, and final election here. Ya McNeil, who is an assistant district attorney in this office for the last 4 years and has done a fabulous job in this and many other capacities, is here to let you see that T-shirt, which says protected. I think it's kind of in the shape of one of those home protection shields that you may see. Protected, and then at the bottom it says DAO Election Task Force, and then in the middle it says something else. Let us be clear. Anybody who tries to mess with this election, intimidate.
All right, Philly DA Larry Krasner talking about election security. He says that there's no indication that anything is happening in Philly besides a free and fair election. If there is anything, he says, bring it to him right away and be suspicious of anything you hear after polls close. Still ahead, it is not just a presidential race that's neck and neck. Control of Congress is also up for grabs. We're going to show you the key races at play next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Today is it, Election Day, and while so many eyes are trained on the presidential race, there are many congressional races that could change the balance of power on Capitol Hill, affecting all of us. So here to break it down is CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, I love it when you're at a touchboard. Talk to us about the key congressional races.
We are in this now. There's no escaping. The election is here, and the entire country is in play when you talk about Congress. Let me begin in the U.S. Senate, where if Democrats lose as few as just one seat, they could lose control of the U.S. Senate, and they're playing defense in an awful lot of places. Let me show you a few of them. Pennsylvania is a battleground Senate race in addition to being a presidential battleground. Three-term Democrat Bob Casey trying to win a fourth term against Dave McCormick, endorsed by former President Trump. This is a state in which tens of millions of dollars have been spent. Let's go to a state Trump won in 2020 and 2016. Another one of those three-term Democrats. Sherrod Brown trying to win a fourth term with Bernie Moreno, the Republican, in the U.S. Senate. This is a race that both parties think is competitive. Sherrod Brown does very well with union voters, blue-collar voters who've been going toward Trump. He's big in the 3 C cities of Ohio, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus. How about Montana? Another state that went for Trump in 2016 and 2020. John Tester is trying to protect this seat against political newcomer and military veteran Tim Sheehy. Those are 3 different third-term Democrats trying to win fourth terms, but none of them, Lana, has ever won a Senate race when Donald Trump's on the ballot, too.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that, Scott, because obviously there is a drafting effect that happens with the leader at the top. What do you think about these races and how they'll signal what we might expect in terms of trends, at least, at the presidential level?
There would have to be some amount of split-ticket voting, presumably, for John Tester to win in Montana, a state that's Donald Trump's prohibitive favorite state among those. I mean, he is overwhelmingly favored in Montana, so you'd have to split tickets. That doesn't happen often in recent Senate races. But in the U.S. House, a different dynamic's going on, where Democrats are increasingly optimistic about otherwise red states and some of the seats in those states. They have made an 11th-hour push in Iowa, including in the 1st District and in the 3rd District. Marionette Miller Meeks has 2 terms, but in 2020, she won this seat by just 6 votes. Democrats are trying to oust her in the 1st District. In the 3rd District, they're trying to make inroads against Congressman Zach Nunn. You remember those Iowa polls this weekend? They're increasingly bullish about the House races there, too.
Scott, I just came back from Iowa. There is a lot of people very interested in the results of this election. Thank you. Well, in Minnesota, the home of Democratic vice presidential nominee Governor Tim Walz, voting lines have been steadily growing all morning long. Shayla Reeves has the latest from St. Louis Park.
Today, Minnesota voters are getting their say in what's next for the country and what's next for their communities. We are here at one of the polling locations in Hennepin County, St. Louis Park, the Recreation Center, where the line has continued to build throughout the morning. We know that this is just one location where people will be casting those ballots. In addition to the presidential race, Minnesota voters are deciding who will represent them in the state legislature. 134 House seats are up for grabs. Decisions made today could impact if Democrats keep control of the House, Senate, and governor's seat, or if Republicans will end the DFL's trifecta. We know Republican Royce White is vying for the seat currently held by Democrat Amy Klobuchar. Each of Minnesota's 8 congressional districts is on the ballot, too. If we bring you back out here, right now the line is continuing to build as people work to cast those ballots at the beginning of the day. Minnesota, though, voters here, they have a history of showing up. Just to give you an idea, the state held the record for the highest voter turnout in the country for 3 years in a row. That's until Maine surpassed us in 2022. More than 1.1 million Minnesotans had already cast their ballot ahead of Election Day. And right here in Hennepin County, 1 in 4 registered voters had already voted as of last week. I'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Shayla Reeves. And we are following the first votes being cast in today's historic election. We're live at polling centers across the country. More straight ahead. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Voters in New Hampshire have been heading to the polls since late last night as the very first polls in the nation opened in Dixville Notch. CBS News Boston reporter Penny Kmitt is there.
I'm Penny Kmitt in New Hampshire, where voting has actually been underway since midnight, as is tradition with the tiny town of Dixville Notch. Their 6 residents were the first to cast their ballots, and they ended up in a complete tie, very representative of what we could see today. 3 of them voted for former President Donald Trump, and the other 3 residents for Vice President Kamala Harris. However, there is a very important governor's race happening here in New Hampshire. In that case, they were not tied at all. 5 of them voted for the Republican candidate, Kelly Ayotte, while just 1 voted for Joyce Craig, the Democratic candidate. Back to you.
All right, thank you. Well, we are also keeping tabs on Ted Cruz's fight to keep his Senate seat in Texas today. CBS News Texas reporter Trevor Sohaki is in Houston with the latest on this increasingly tight race.
I'm Trevor Sohaki in Houston, where we're watching a very close race for the Texas Senate seat between Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Colin Allred. While Senator Cruz has led in the polls for the majority of this race, Representative Allred has also made it very close and very competitive and kept it that way for the majority of the race as well. Now, Ted Cruz has been crisscrossing the state on a 53-stop bus tour. His slogan is "Keep Texas, Texas." He's been casting his challenger as too liberal, soft on crime, and too focused on cultural issues. Meanwhile, Colin Allred has hit back, consistently reminding voters of Senator Cruz leaving the state during the winter freeze a few years ago. The Democrat has also blamed Republicans for Texas's near-total abortion ban. And tonight, Representative Allred will be in Dallas, his home district, watching the results come in. And Senator Cruz will be in Houston, watching the results come in at a campaign watch party there. Back to you.
All right, let's bring in now CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore. Grant, give us a last look at that national forecast.
I'll tell you what, Lana, warmth is going to be the big story across the east, where temperatures are soaring into the upper 80s, even some low 90s in some places. Mid-70s up in New York City. You head west, you're going to run into a pretty strong cold front producing heavy rain from Minnesota all the way down to Louisiana. Meanwhile, on the backside of that cold front, chilly air. In fact, a lot of Rocky Mountain snow. Some places expecting 4 to 8 inches of snow, if not more than that. But then cooler across the desert southwest. Phoenix today, looking at high temperatures around 74 degrees. Lana, we've got a lot of weather across the country, but a lot of the battleground states dealing with fairly nice voting weather.
All right, Grant, thanks so much. Well, that does it for me. As a reminder, be sure to stay with us for all-day coverage. You can watch Election Night with the CBS News team from our election headquarters in New York and with our team spread out across the country. Join us for real-time results analysis and exclusive polling. Get out there and vote. Many people have made sacrifices to ensure that we could all do so. So please stay with us and exercise your constitutional rights.